My stepson called me a gold digger for years while I paid his $30K university. Then he destroyed my car. So I kicked him out, divorced his dad, and took back $95,000 they never saw coming. I'm 33 years old. I work in project management for a tech company, and I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago basically destroyed my 6-year marriage and made me realize I'd been living a lie this whole time. The truth is, I'm still struggling to process everything, but I guess starting from the beginning will help me understand it better, or at least get it out of my system once and for all. I met Stephen when I was like 27. He was 35 and had just been widowed about 2 years prior. We met at a business conference, one of those boring ones where everyone pretends to be interested in the presentations, but really they're just there for the networking and free drinks afterwards. He was handsome, charismatic, and there was something about the way he talked about his business that drew me in, that genuine passion you rarely see in people. He told me he had a son, Caleb, who at the time was like 13 or 14, and that he was raising him alone after his wife died in a car accident. Honestly, my first instinct was not to get involved because, widower with a teenage son isn't exactly what a single 27-year-old woman is looking for, you know what I mean? But there was something about Stephen that made me want to get to know him better. And after several months of dates and video calls, we lived in different cities, I decided to take the leap. What I didn't expect, and looking back, I should have seen it coming, was that Caleb was going to reject me from the very first second. The first time I met him, Stephen organized a dinner at his house. Like casual, nothing too formal. But the kid didn't even look me in the eye all night. He stayed quiet, answered with monosyllables. When I tried to make conversation, and at one point he just got up and went to his room without apologizing or anything. Stephen told me it was normal, that Caleb was still processing his mother's death and needed time to adjust to the idea of his father dating someone. And well, I understood, or at least I tried to understand, because what else could I do? I wasn't going to demand that a traumatized teenager accept me immediately. The next few months were complicated, basically. Stephen and I moved in together to a bigger rental house like a year and a half into dating, thinking that maybe a new space would help Caleb feel more comfortable with the situation. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. If anything, things got worse because now I was in his space all the time, not just showing up occasionally for awkward dinners. The kid actively ignored me, left his stuff lying around the whole house knowing it bothered me, and made passive-aggressive comments all the time like, "My mom used to do this differently," or "My mom never would have made us move here." And look, I didn't expect him to call me mom or anything like that, but a minimum of basic respect didn't seem like too much to ask. Honestly, Stephen and I got married when I was 29. It was a small wedding, just close family and some friends. Nothing too elaborate because Stephen was in the process of launching his own consulting business, and money was a bit tight. I had a stable, well-paying job, so I didn't mind covering most of the wedding expenses. Caleb, who by then was like 16, didn't even want to be in the family photos. He stayed in a corner all night with a funeral face, and when my brother Kevin tried to talk to him, the kid just told him this was a betrayal of his mother's memory. It was devastating. I'm not going to lie. But Stephen assured me that eventually Caleb would accept the situation, and we just needed to give him more time. This is where things get complicated. Financially speaking, Stephen's business, which in theory was going to take off any moment, basically failed during the first 2 years of our marriage. It wasn't necessarily his fault. The market was tough, and he had bad luck with some clients who didn't pay. But the result was that suddenly I became the only source of income for the household. And when I say I supported the family, I paid for literally everything. Rent, utilities, food, gas, and yes, also Caleb's college tuition when he started university at 18. Stephen kept trying to make his business work, and I supported him because I believed in him and because, well, that's what couples do, right? They support each other in difficult times. What I didn't know at the time, and this is something that still makes me angry when I think about it, is that Caleb was overhearing all our discussions about money. Stephen and I fought quite a bit about finances. He felt bad about not being able to contribute, and I was frustrated because I felt like I was carrying everything alone. And apparently Caleb was listening to these conversations through his bedroom walls. But what the kid interpreted, somehow, is that I was a gold digger who was with Stephen for his money. Yes, you read that right. He thought I was with his father for money, when literally I was the one paying for everything, including his $30,000 a year college education. The irony is so ridiculous it's almost funny, except it's not funny at all when you're living it. Caleb started treating me even worse after that. He called me a gold digger when Stephen wasn't around, made comments about how his father deserved better, and generally made me feel like an intruder in my own home. Stephen, when I told him, always minimized it, saying Caleb was just a troubled teenager and I shouldn't take it personally. But how could I not take it personally when someone is insulting you to your face every day? And the part that hurt the most was that Stephen never really defended me, never set clear boundaries with his son or told him, "Hey, Michelle is my wife and part of this family. Treat her with respect." It was always, "Give him time," or "He's going through a difficult stage." Fast forward to like 8 months ago, when Caleb was already 19 and in his second year of college. I had a super important meeting with a potential client, one of those meetings that can change your career, and I had planned everything meticulously, including leaving the house 2 hours early, because morning traffic is a nightmare. I got up early, got ready, grabbed my briefcase and my keys, and when I went out to the garage, my car wasn't there. My car, which I had bought with my money and which meant something to me because it was the first big purchase I made after getting my promotion, just wasn't there. I totally panicked. Obviously. First, I thought it had been stolen, but then I saw that the keys I normally left on the kitchen hook weren't there either, and that's when I realized what had happened. I called Stephen, who was out of town for work, and he told me Caleb had asked to borrow my keys the night before because his car was in the shop. Stephen had given him permission without asking me or letting me know, assuming it wouldn't be a problem. I got so angry. I almost threw my phone, but I tried to stay calm and called Caleb like 20 times. He didn't answer a single call or respond to any messages. I had to get an Uber to get to my meeting, which I missed anyway because I arrived late and the client had already left. I lost an opportunity I'd been chasing for months, and all because my husband thought it was okay to give his son my things without consulting me. When I finally got home that afternoon, after a horrible day at the office trying to repair the damage with the client, I found my car parked in the driveway with the front bumper completely destroyed and the left headlight broken. Caleb had crashed it into something, I don't know what exactly because he never gave me a coherent explanation, and he just left it there like nothing happened. What happened next probably wasn't my finest moment, but honestly, I don't regret it. I went into the house and Caleb was in the living room playing video games like nothing had happened. I asked him what happened to my car, and he, without even pausing the game, told me he'd had a small accident, but it was no big deal. A small accident. My car, which I loved, destroyed, and to him, it was no big deal. Something in me broke in that moment. Honestly, all those years of putting up with his contempt, of paying for everything including his education, of being treated like trash in my own home, everything exploded at once. I walked over, took the controller out of his hands and told him he had exactly 5 seconds to explain to me what had happened and why he thought he could take my things without permission. He stood up, looked at me with that superiority face he always had, and said to me, and I remember this perfectly because the words are burned into my brain, "I don't have to explain anything to you. You're just my dad's gold digger. You're not my mom and you never will be." And that's when I slapped him. It wasn't a hard slap. Like, I didn't hurt him or anything, but the surprise on his face was instant, and the sound echoed throughout the room. After that, I started yelling at him. And when I say yelling, I mean I let out everything I'd been holding in for years. I told him I had paid every cent of his college education, that I paid the rent on the house where he lived, that I bought the food he ate, and that his father hadn't contributed financially in 3 years because he was trying to keep afloat a business that clearly wasn't going to work. I told him that if anyone was a gold digger in this situation, it was him, living off my money while treating me like garbage. His face went from surprise to shock to something I could describe as horror when he understood that everything he thought about the situation was completely backwards. Caleb tried to say something. I think he was going to apologize or explain himself, but I was already packing my things. I called Kevin, my brother, who thank God didn't ask questions and just told me he'd be at my a house in 20 minutes to help me collect what I needed. I stuffed clothes for a week, my laptop, important documents, and some personal items into 2 large suitcases, while Caleb followed me around the house saying, wait, that he was sorry, that he didn't know. I didn't believe a single word, because how could he not know? 3 years. Like, 3 years of me paying for everything, and he thought I was the one taking advantage. The denial has to be intentional at that level, you know what I mean? I went to a hotel that night, one of those mid-range Marriotts that isn't luxurious but is comfortable enough, and that's when I really processed what had happened and what I was going to do about it. Stephen called me around 10 at night, having heard everything from Caleb, and tried to convince me to come back so we could talk. I told him there was nothing to talk about, that I was going to file divorce papers as soon as I found a lawyer, and that I didn't plan to return to that house ever. Again, he tried to argue that I was overreacting, that it had just been a fight, and all families have conflicts, but I knew in that moment that this wasn't just a fight. This was the result of 6 years of being disrespected and taken for granted. The next few days were a whirlwind, basically. I stayed at the hotel while looking for an apartment, and both Stephen and Caleb were messaging me all the time. Stephen alternated between apologizing and blaming me, saying I had crossed a line by slapping Caleb and that he was very hurt by my reaction. Caleb, for his part, sent me long messages explaining that he never wanted things to get to this point and that he didn't know I was paying for everything. But what struck me, and this is important, is that neither of them mentioned how they were going to fix the situation or how they were going to change. They were only worried about me coming back because without my money, they weren't going to be able to maintain the lifestyle they had. I decided to do a test, like to confirm my suspicions. I sent Stephen a message saying I would consider coming back under one condition, that Caleb move out and find his own place to live. I told him I couldn't be in a house where his son constantly disrespected me, and that if he really valued me as his wife, he needed to show that I was his priority, not Caleb. Stephen's response was revealing. Honestly, it took him like 3 hours to respond. And when he did, it was with a long message about how Caleb was his son and he couldn't just kick him out, that it was my responsibility as a wife to understand that children come first, and that if I couldn't accept that, then maybe I wasn't ready to be part of a family. That answer gave me everything I needed to know. I took a screenshot of our entire conversation and sent it to Caleb with a message that said something like, "This is what your father really thinks. I thought you should know." Yes, I know. It was petty. But at that moment I didn't care. I wanted Caleb to see that Stephen was willing to prioritize him even when that meant completely disregarding my feelings and needs. Apparently it worked because 2 days later Stephen called me furious, saying that Caleb had packed his things and left to live with a friend, feeling betrayed because his father had even considered for a moment kicking him out of the house. I hired a lawyer, Janet Myers, who came highly recommended by a friend who had gone through a complicated divorce. I explained the whole situation to her, including the 3 years I had financially supported the family, and she told me I had a solid case to recover, at least part of the money I had invested in the house and in Caleb's education. We filed the divorce papers like 2 weeks after I left, and Stephen's face when he received the documents must have been epic, according to what Janet told me, although I wasn't there to see it, obviously. Stephen tried to contest the divorce, arguing that the amount I was asking for in the settlement was excessive, and that I was trying to punish him financially for his son's mistakes. But Janet had all the receipts, literally, all the bank statements, showing that I had paid rent, utilities, food, and Caleb's tuition for 3 years. The math was simple. I had put in like $180,000 into that family during that time, not counting other minor expenses, and I was asking for $120,000 back as part of the settlement. I was still being generous, considering I technically could have asked for all of it back. The first mediation session was a disaster. Stephen showed up with his own lawyer, a guy who clearly didn't have much experience in divorce cases because he kept trying to make emotional arguments instead of legal ones, saying things like, "My client is devastated, and this was a functioning family until the lady decided to leave." Janet destroyed him. Basically, presenting all the evidence of the payments and asking directly where Stephen's financial contribution was during the last 3 years. Stephen's lawyer had no answer for that, and Stephen himself stayed quiet, staring at the table for most of the session. The divorce process took like 7 months total, which was faster than I honestly expected. During that time, I moved to a small but nice apartment in a better area of the city, cut off communication almost completely with Stephen except what was necessary for the legal process, and started going to therapy because, 6 years of your life don't disappear without leaving a mark, and I needed to process everything. My therapist helped me understand that there were red flags from the beginning that I had ignored, like the way Stephen always minimized Caleb's behavior or how he never really defended me in front of his son. When the divorce papers were finally signed, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I recovered $95,000 of the $120,000 I had asked for, which wasn't everything but was more than Stephen initially wanted to give me. He had to sell some things and take out a loan to gather the money, and although part of me felt guilty about that, most of me remembered all those years paying for everything while being treated like a stranger in my own home, and the guilt disappeared pretty quickly. What I didn't expect was the reaction of people around us. Stephen apparently started telling his version of the story on social media, playing the victim and saying I had left him at his worst moment and that I had robbed him of all his money in the divorce. He didn't mention, of course, that I had supported the family for 3 years, or that the money I recovered was literally mine to begin with. Some mutual friends, the ones who didn't know the whole story, started sending me messages asking if it was true that I was a gold digger who had left Stephen with nothing. The irony that the same accusation Caleb had made for years was now being repeated by people who were supposed to know me was almost comical if it wasn't so painful. I had to cut contact with several of those friends because I simply didn't have the energy to explain the whole situation to each person. The ones I really cared about? My brother Kevin, my best friend from college, some colleagues from work who had become close friends, supported me completely and told me I had done the right thing. Kevin specifically told me I should have left years ago and that he had always thought Stephen was taking advantage of me. He just never wanted to say anything because he knew I wasn't ready to hear it. It's been like 3 months since the divorce was finalized, and honestly, I'm in a much better place now. I have my own space that I decorated exactly how I want, without having to consider anyone else's opinions. My work is going incredibly well. I even managed to recover the client I had lost because of the car incident, and now we're working on a big project together. I started doing things I had stopped doing during my marriage, like taking yoga classes and going out with friends on weekends without feeling like I had to get home early, to avoid more drama. The car, by the way, I fixed it with money from the divorce settlement. Paul, the owner of the auto shop where I took it, did an amazing job, and it was practically like new. It cost me like $4,000 to fix it, which is ridiculous for a small accident, but it was worth it, because now every time I drive it, it's a reminder that I no longer have to tolerate being disrespected or having my things taken without permission. I haven't heard much from Stephen or Caleb since the divorce was finalized. I heard through the grapevine that Caleb had to drop out of college because Stephen can't pay tuition without my money. And although part of me feels bad for the kid because at the end of the day he's only 19 and still figuring out who he is, most of me thinks maybe this is the lesson he needed to learn about consequences and about not biting the hand that feeds. AU. Stephen is apparently trying to revive his consulting business again, and honestly, I wish him luck with that. But it's no longer my problem. Last week, I was organizing some old papers and found photos from our wedding, the ones Caleb refused to be in. I stared at them for a while, trying to remember how I felt that day, if there were already signs that things were going to end like this. The truth is, there probably were, but I was so wrapped up in the idea of making this blended family work and being the understanding and supportive wife that I didn't want to see them. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't hurt, or that I don't miss some things about being married, because I do miss them. But what I don't miss is feeling invisible and undervalued in my own life. I'm planning a trip to Greece for next summer, something I always wanted to do but never could because Stephen said it was too expensive or it wasn't the right time with the business. I'm going to go alone. Or maybe I'll invite Kevin or a friend, and I'm going to enjoy every second without having to worry about anyone but myself. And that, I guess, is the closest I've been to feeling truly free in years.